Hello. Like many of you, I like tanks. Specifically, Cold War tanks. So, imagine the delight I found last night, scrolling through the phone, just before midnight, that Amazon had the starter for Team Yankee at a reduced price. Admittedly, it's not that expensive to begin with, but I've just been kind of eyeing it up and putting it off for a while, as I have way too much of a backlog to paint as it is. But for 20 quid, I wasn't going to say no. So, I've played a little bit of Flames of War 3rd edition back in the day. And I kind of dipped out on it when this came out originally. Not this particular box, but Team Yankee as a whole. I believe the sets which came out back then were Petrov's Bears and maybe Bannon's Boys when it was initially launched. I've been quite impressed with the helicopters. Anyway, so I bought this to hopefully get one of my mates into playing with it, as it's relatively inexpensive for a war game, I think. You seem to be able to build a decent list, provided you're not doing something like a spam list, for about 100 to 120 quid. And I'm kind of looking at this as sort of a casual game, shall we say. But let's look inside the box. So I've done the shrink wrap on this. As when it turned up with my address plastered all outside of it, with no box, just shrink. So we have our start here booklet. I'm guessing this is instructions. Oh no, units. Followed by instructions, which is a little bit different compared to some of the other starter boxes I've seen for Battlefront put out. I know the Flames of War ones, usually the instruction guides just come on just a little kind of A4 sheet. And further expansions. Well, I have an idea for further expansions already for the Soviets, thinking about it, which I might talk about at the end. Anyway, so what's actually in the box? So, olive sprues are Soviet/Warsaw Pact. These are T-64s. You get 3 of them. They've just released an upgrade kit for this, which makes the T-64 BV version, which is an additional armour package for it. You've probably seen them before. They're like the little rectangular blocks which go on turrets and holes and stuff, which is explosives, which they fire out when they detect incoming tank shells. I think they're usually against high explosive anti-tank rounds. Anyway, so you get 3 of these in the box. I've had a little perusal of the stats already online, and they seem to be quite a decent little unit actually. They have a nice kind of mid-range tank. Following that, you have BMP-3s, which function as your kind of recon vehicle. You can also take these as a mechanised troop transport for rifle platoons. Infantry doesn't seem to play as much as a role in Team Yankee as it does in Flames of War. In Flames of War, you see a lot of kind of full-on infantry companies which will have sort of 30, 40 bases worth of guys, while Team Yankee, a company for infantry, might have like 10, 15 bases. It seems to be a lot more focused on tanks and aircraft than Flames of War. Anyway, so I believe this kit usually has another sprue alongside it when you buy it in a full release, which builds the BMP-2. It's quite a decent little kit actually. There's not too many parts to it. It looks like it will go together quite well. It's funny, looking at it, it looks a bit about the same size as the T-64 with the whole length. So in the final kit for the Soviet or Warsaw Pact side is the T-80. Now I think that when this starter box came out, this was brand spanking new and had been made for the box. This is kind of a heavy tank equivalent. This is one of, I think, the most modern vehicle within the game. Don't hold me to it, because I don't know too much about the timeline or what they have within their kind of internal lore. So you get 4 of these. Quite a strong main gun. I believe it's an anti-tank 22 weapon, which is pretty bloody potent. Looks like it's got era armor, the explosive applied armor already applied to it, which is pretty cool. Lots of nice little details on it. These are like dozer blades, mine flails, which are an option in game. So you're kind of looking at a spam armoured vehicle list, I guess, from this box with the Soviets. Even the US is more quality over quantity, I suppose, though with the T-80s in there, you could argue that the Soviets are doing a better job than the US with this box. So following up, for the first kit, the US, we have the M1. So I think this builds 3 different variants. So there's the baseline M1 kit, the IP M1, which is an additional armor kit, and then the M1A1, which is a bigger cannon or a bigger shell. I'm not entirely sure. My knowledge of kind of 80s US tanks is pretty lacking. You get 3 of these. Points wise, they're relatively expensive. They're a little bit cheaper than a T-80. Wow. 4 T-80s is slightly less than 3 M1s, but they've got different skill ratings. I think there is a lower skilled M1 which you can take in one of the source books or the splat books, which puts them at about T-80 price. Anyway, I digress. Following up with that, we have the Bradleys, Armoured Fighting Vehicles. So I think this builds a couple of different variants. This is kind of the baseline M3 to my knowledge. So this builds kind of it can be used as a scout essentially, but it's also got a tow missile, which is really good for anti-tank. In Team Yankee, a lot of the vehicles have options for tow missiles, or their main guns can fire an optional missile. The Soviet ones especially, like I think pretty much every baseline Soviet tank either comes with a missile or has the option of buying one, except maybe a T-64. I'm not 100%, haven't looked too much at the 64. I could completely wrong, to be honest with you, which I probably am. I'm good at that. So the main difference in which variant you build with the Bradley is the side skirts. One of them counts, I think the A1 version counts as having an additional armor, and it's something that has a special which is like adapted armor, which is probably similar to era blocks on Soviet tanks, I'd imagine. So you get 2 of these. These, as far as I can tell stat-wise, at least in this box set, are the most consistent way of killing the T-80s. Because the T-80s have a front armor of 20, the Abrams main guns anti-tank is 20. So you basically, it all comes down to who's rolling higher. But the tow weapons on these have an anti-tank of 22, so you've got that slight edge against the T-80s when firing against them. The Abrams in this set really feel not so much undergunned, but compared to the T-80s, they're definitely a weaker choice, I think. They're just going to struggle that little bit more trying to kill them than vice versa. And with the amount of vehicles on the Soviet side, it's going to be a lot easier for the Soviets to set up flanking shots, which is something to watch out for if you're playing this out of the box, I guess. So the last kit for the US is the M60, which is kind of a Vietnam era tank, from what I remember, which is being continued to be used. I think by the time frame that Team Yankee is set in both the real world and the Team Yankee world, the M60 had kind of fallen out of favour and it was a reservist tank option. I know it was still used in some of the Marines, but for actual general army use, I was reading something the other day which was saying it was only the National Guard really used it. They used a mix of M60s and M48s, I think it was. These are kind of They're not as good as a T64, but they're not bad tanks. They're not quite cheap and cheerful. They'll die if anything advanced looks at it, I'd say. But they've got a pretty decent main gun, which is only a little bit weaker than the Abrams main gun. So this is something which you might have a couple just hanging back and just plinking off shots. Or you'd use them to run around and chase off other light armoured vehicles, stuff like BMPs. Or maybe some of the Soviet kind of Storm vehicles. They have like an armoured tractor with a rocket on the top. Stuff like that, essentially. So we have a little selection bag of crewmen. Bring them in a little bit closer. I think these are US tankers. PC-107. These are kind of a resin-like material. I think they call it thermoplastic. It's got kind of a chalky finish. It reminds me a lot of early Finecast when it came out. It's better quality, but it's got the same kind of softy, soapy texture. It's hard to describe unless you handled early Finecast, which probably some of you have. But they changed the recipe for that quite quickly because there was 2 initial recipes. The initial recipe was the absolute terrible one, and then they improved it slightly, and it had a different texture afterwards and a different smell. Not that you should be going around sniffing resin, really, but you know, it's one of those things which happens. And then these are Soviet tankers. So these themselves are from Flames of War. So these are kind of the World War II-esque ones where they've got the padded helmets. I've got a few packs of these just from when I played Flames of War back in the day. So you get quite a lot of them. And most of the tanks, I think, or pretty much all of them, have an option to have an open turret hatch with someone sticking their head out. We have dice. They are standard dice. Blues for Americans, red for Soviets. I hate their dice. They're too small, I think. I don't know, something about them. They don't have a good hand feel, which is probably the most subjective load of nonsense you could get. And finally, we have the tiny rulebook, which I always struggle to get out of the tiny bag. So this is pretty much the full A5 size rulebook for the game, or rather, usually it's A4, and they've shrunk it down to A5. One of these comes with pretty much every main box set for Team Yankee, as far as I can tell. Flames of War does the same thing. Every starter set, every starter army, every army group, basically every box above about 50 quid has a rulebook in. Which is pretty cool, actually. I know I've got plans for all the excess books I have just to take them down to my club and just hand them out and just like get rid of them. And then hopefully that will like entice people to play the game, you know? So it's kind of a little bit of marketing if you wanna get some friends to play against you. But having owned a hard copy rulebook, which I won in a raffle of all places, there is no difference between the two as far as I can tell. I haven't gone over it word for word, but it looks to all be there. The pages all line up, stuff like that. So the last thing is the unit cards. So I remember when Team Yankee first came out, and they moved on to this kind of card standard. And the amount of salt which was coming out of people about these cards at the time. And I thought they were really handy. Like, fair enough, it was because I think there was some fear that books wouldn't accompany sets and that you'd be basically playing everything based off of these cards. And people like a book. I like a book. But I thought these cards were brilliant. I especially remember where I frequented for the my games general, I guess. Threads were having absolute meltdowns about them. So have the T64. It also has kind of the platoon size and stuff on the back and all the special rules, which is really nice. I heard somewhere that they're not going to be including cards in any of their box sets anymore, and you're going to have to go out and buy the packs separately. I can understand it, but now that they're doing this thing where they're doing, I think they're called dynamic points, they're putting out essentially out PDFs to update what they consider underperforming units. And when you're paying for a pack of cards with points on, and then they're turning around and going, the points aren't valid anymore, it's kind of and we're not going to reprint the cards, obviously, because these are kind of a one and done deal. You get a pack every time a new book comes out, and then you just kind of buy the pack, and that updates compared to the previous pack. So I think at the moment the current Soviet one is Red Dawn. I'm not sure if the US got a card pack with it, but anyway. So T-64, there's a couple of different versions of these in the game. This is kind of the baseline Soviet one. 22 anti-tank, main gun. A missile, which is 21 anti-tank, but it's got heat. And guided, which I believe is a modifier to hit. The BMP, the T-80. So front armor 20, which, comparing it to the Abrams, is better. So realistically, your T-80 is going to be tougher than your Abrams. Poor Abrams. Two T-80 cards. So you have the more that's the HQ card. Oh, comes with a separate HQ card. That's cool. So this is the generic kind of company card. This is what you're basing your units off. T-80s are quite expensive in the game. Yeah, 10 for 88 points. This is kind of mid-war. Flames of War used to be like this, where you could have 10 tanks, but that was your army. The BMP Scout, or BMP Free Scout, once again, has a missile. 21. That is pretty damn cool. I think there's only a couple of points as well, a pair. There you go, 5 points for 2 BMP Frees. Oh, anti-helicopter. Oh, anti-tank 10 and anti-helicopter gun. That's quite good. At least, I think it is. Number go up, make me happy. So this is kind of your command team. If you can see here, this gives you the list option for what you can actually take. This is the free list on Forces of War. The actual US list I think is a little bit different. But yeah, main gun, anti-tank 20. So you might not be killing them T-80s. So the M1 Abrams, pretty much same as the command one. If you see this IPM 1, IPM 1, I wasn't saying it wrong. This is an up-armoured version which you can take. I think it's about a point more. It just gives you a little pip of extra front armour. Basically, during the Cold War, once I think it was the T-72 started getting the era armour applied, they realised that they had to up-armour the Abrams. And before they put a full kit in place, which was the A1 variant, they did the IPM 1, which was just an armour kit, because the M1A1 changed the engine and the cannon, or the shell used, I believe. Don't really see IP ones anymore. M60 pattern, as I said, it's a little medium tank. It's funny to think that in like late war Flames of War, this would have been an absolute monster, because Flames of War uses exactly the same rule set, kind of armor system. So anti-tank 20 is something which you would have only seen on something like a mid-war monster, like an elephant, or a Dicker's Max, or a Sturengel, one of those really kind of one-off weird German Wonder weapons. But yeah. The M3 Bradley. Although the sprue builds the A2 version, you only get the card for the base M3, I believe. Although it's got... Oh no, it's got the stat line on it. Okay. I've seen an M3 A2 card before. Yeah. Relatively nice light vehicle. Probably better than the BMP3, I'd say, but probably a little bit more expensive, as most things are on their US v Soviet. Yep, there we are. Anti-tank 23, the only consistent way you're going to be able to kill T-80s in this box, and you've got 2 of them. So let's hope they don't go down. So I think, for the price-wise, this is a pretty decent little introduction to it, the game as a whole. It's probably going to be quite familiar to me when I play it from when I played Flames of War 3rd edition. I'm guessing there's going to be lots of little things which will catch me up, which have changed ever so slightly. I'm kind of looking forward to it. I appreciate Battlefront doing these tank-heavy starter boxes instead of a more hybrid approach, which I did previously. I tend to find it's easier to get people to play the game when it's tanks. Something about infantry tends to drive people off, I think, and infantry can take a while to get to grips with because it opens up a whole extra kind of set of rules. They really do bog the game down a bit. But some of the most fun games I've ever had have been infantry heavy lists. Beyond that, I think these forces come to around 40 points, 50 points each. I think it'll tell us in the book. Let's have a quick look in the book. Excuse me while I destroy the place. As you can see, I am not a professional unboxer in the slightest. So here we are. So an IPM-1 Abrams as the HQ, 2 M1s, 2 M60s, 2 Bradleys, 41 points. So a usual game is around 100 points, give or take. 75 to 100, so this is kind of a skirmish. So the Soviets are actually outnumbering the US in terms of points. So you have a T-80 as your company HQ, 3 standard T-80s, and 3 T-64s with the 2 BMP-3s. So if you wanted to kind of make it just that little bit fairer, you could drop a T-80, or you could drop the 2 BMP-3s to put it on a little bit more of an equal footing. I think 7 points difference isn't really going to make that much of a difference, but if you really kind of strive for the most balanced play experience you can have out of the box, I guess. So this is what they're kind of saying is the next steps, which is fair enough. You have the US Army book, and then they've given you a couple of unit selections as kind of standouts. So EM-109 artillery, Humvees, which are pretty much no armour but mount a variety of weapons which are quite fun. You can tune them for anti-tank, anti-infantry and anti-aircraft. I must admit I've been eyeing up sort of a whole Humvee list if I can get away with it, because I think it'll be stupidly good fun. The Apache. I don't know too much about how helicopters work in this game, so I'm going to have to look into that at some point, because they do look quite nice kits and a good amount of fun. I know in Flames of War it was aircraft were kind of, they weren't proper models, they were more markers which you'd bring on the board. They do something and they disappear, kind of like coming in from reserved in 40k. For the Soviet side, you have the Soviet book, which I actually have already. I kind of bought that prior to buying this because it was £7, and why wouldn't you? The BRDM, which is a vehicle kind of like the BMP series, except it's wheeled. It builds an armoured car variant and an anti-tank version, which is that one in the picture, and an anti-air, which shoots off some little rockets, which is quite neat. They're also really, really cheap in points. You have the Frogfoot, which is the Soviet version of an A10 basically. And it is cool as big mummy milkers. And then finally behind, once again, a big chunky helicopter, also a lovely looking kit. I think the Hind is made by Battlefront. A lot of the aircraft and the helicopters are made by third-party companies. And then we have a little picture of the starter boxes available. So they're big starter boxes for kind of armies. Usually have between about 60 to 80 points worth. So what they're kind of suggesting is you buy one of these and jam it in with this to build a full-size army. The US one is pretty good from what I can tell. 4 Humvees, 2 helis, artillery, a couple of Bradleys and a few more Abrams. The Humvees, the artillery, and the helicopters are obviously new compared to what's in this box. So you get a couple of units of variety, which is quite nice. Then the Soviet side is T-80 galore. It's a T-80 shot company, which is a veteran T-80 tank company. And it's basically just loads of T-80s. 2 more BMP-3s, 2 helis, and then 5 of the BRDMs, which can either be built as the anti-tank or anti-air variant. And then 2 Frogfruits, which, as I said, are top-notch. I don't think that is probably that great a buy, although the air elements are quite nice. I think it's quite a lot the same with the T-80s. I think the unit selection is a little bit better in the American side. I've already picked up an army box to round out the Soviet side to 100 points. I picked up the Warsaw Pact T-72B starter set, which comes with a fair amount of sort of variety of units. It adds in kind of the missing 2 tank lines into this box, in the T-55 and the T-72. And then the T-72 in the box included can build 3 different variants. It can build the baseline T-72, which was the initial plastic tank released for Team Yankee, I think, for the Soviets. And then the upgraded version, which is quite nice. And then it comes with fitters, which are another aircraft, similar in role to the Frogfruits, but more kind of anti-infantry, I guess. And then 2 Hinds, plus some T-55s, which are your cheap spammy tank. Some BMPs, once again, scout vehicles, and then some BRDMs for either anti-tank or anti-air. And pretty much massing that box and this together gives you a 100-point list, with either the helicopters left out or a couple of tanks left out. And it seems to be a bit more balanced than just nothing but T-80s. So start here, and that I will, I guess. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. I'm going to hopefully get this built over the next week or so in preparation of taking it to my club on Friday night. We're going to play a Flames of War starter set, which I picked up, ironically, just before this, because it was also extremely cheap on Amazon. God bless you, Amazon. And then we're going to round off the evening by playing Team Yankee. And I might even bring a cowboy hat and holla yeehaw. No, that's disgusting. I could never do something like that. Anyway, have a good day. I hope this has been interesting. I appreciate it. Probably hasn't been, because I'm really boring. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.